Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Gopijana Vallabha Girivadachari Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vaishnavis. Itam in these features. Bhavena, the matter of creation and destruction. Katita, described. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Bhagavatama, by the great transcendentalists. Na, not. Itam, in this. Bhavena, features. He, only. Param, most glorious. Drashtum, to see. Ahanti, deserve. Suraya, great devotees. Translation. The great transcendentalists thus describe the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the pure devotees deserve to see more glorious things in transcendence beyond these features. Responsively. The great transcendentalists thus describe the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the pure devotees deserve to see more glorious things in transcendence beyond these features. Purport. The Lord is not only the creator and destroyer of the material manifestation of his different energies. He is more than a simple creator and destroyer, for there is his feature of Ananda, or his pleasure feature. This feature, it's interesting how Prabhupada said he's more than a simple creator, because when you reflect on what the creation means, that's not a simple thing. You know, what Krishna's actually done in the creation here, and how he creates just by glancing. He doesn't even actually, you don't see Krishna out there with a shovel and a spade digging up the material nature or anything to try and build it. He just glances at it and it happens. It's just a thought process and it happens. So it's interesting how Prabhupada says more than a simple creator. He's way more than that. And Prabhupada's just, in essence, he's relegating the fact of, or the process of creation as a very simple thing. And so he engages his different energies, but he's much more than that. This pleasure feature of the Lord is understood by the pure devotees only, and not by others. The impersonalist is satisfied simply by understanding the all-pervasive influence of the Lord. This is called Brahman realization. Greater than the impersonalist is the mystic who sees the Lord situated in his heart as Paramatma, the partial representation of the Lord. But there are pure devotees who take part in the direct pleasure, Ananda potency of the Lord, by factual reciprocation of loving service. The Lord in his abode called the Vaikuntha planets, which are eternal manifestations, always remains with his associates and enjoys transcendental loving services by his pure devotees in different transcendental humours. The pure devotees of the Lord thus undergo a practice of that devotional service to the Lord during the manifestation of creation, and take full advantage of the manifestation by qualifying themselves to enter into the kingdom of God. The Bhagavad Gita 18:55 confirms this. Bhaktimam abhijananti yavanyas chasmi tattvataha tato mam tatpato gatva vishate tad anantaram. By development of pure devotional service, one can factually know the Lord as he is, and thus be trained in the bona fide service of the Lord, and be allowed to enter into the direct association of the Lord in so many capacities. The highest glorious association with the Lord is made possible in the planet of Goloka Vrindavan, where Lord Krishna enjoys himself with the gopis and his favorite animals, the Surabhi cows. A description of this transcendental land of Krishna is given in the Brahma Samhita, which is considered by Lord Sri Chaitanya to be the most authentic literature in this connection. Let's read the translation. The great transcendentalists thus describe the activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but the pure devotees deserve to see more glorious things in transcendence beyond these features. There's many points that are brought out here in this verse and purport. We see straight off how Srila Prabhupada is drawing a distinction between great transcendentalists, because one can be a transcendentalist but not necessarily a pure unalloyed devotee of Krishna. And there are many, many great transcendentalists, and Prabhupada often would refer to the impersonalists and the personalists as being examples of transcendentalists. But there are many transcendentalists who reflect upon this creation feature of the Lord, and are marveled at how wondrous it is. And just living in a place like New Govardhana and looking around us at the environment, we can see it's quite extraordinary, the things that happen here and the interactions of all the different elements and how they function. I give a simple example. Even if you look at something like, or even the material body, like medical science doesn't really understand that well how the material body functions, because there's many things, for instance, in the digestive system, how there's all these different bacteria, and depending on how close they are to the wall of the stomach, there's different bacteria. There's, like, right on the wall of the stomach, there's bacteria that protect the wall of the stomach. Then there's other bacteria that have this interaction between that bacteria and the next level of bacteria. There's all these different types of things going on, and it's very much the same in soil. Like, the deeper you go down into the soil, there's different microorganisms functioning in the soil, and when you get right to the surface, then there's a microorganism that lives around the base of a plant that interact between the air and the soil and the plant, and enable the plant to absorb elements from the air, like such as nitrogen. So we can see how there's it's quite extraordinary the way this creation functions, and many transcendentalists are simply absorbed in that and marvel at how the creation functions. But there's verses pointing out here that there's so much more to it than that. And for one who's actually a pure, unalloyed devotee of Krishna, not even interested in these things. Not even interested. So, they appreciate that, yes, the creation is going on by the potency of Krishna. And then if we look here in the second canto, also in the fifth canto, and actually all throughout the Bhagavatam, we can see, even the first canto, we can see how the process of creation is being described, and how wonderfully this is going on. There's an interesting book by Rupa Goswami called the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, and in there's two sections in that book. The first section he describes is called the Bhagavatamrita, or the sweetness of Krishna, and the second, called Krishnamrita, and the second section is called Bhaktamrita, or the sweetness of the devotees. And in the first section, there's 5 chapters, and he's dealing primarily with Krishna and his incarnations. And so he talks about the Swayamrupa, the Tadakatmarupa, and the Aveshrupa incarnations of Krishna. So Swayamrupa means Krishna's own form. Tadakatmarupa, this is the form of Krishna where so many other forms, complete forms of Krishna and partial expansions come from. And then the Aveshrupa are those forms that are empowered by Krishna to function in this world, such as Shaktavesh incarnations, Vibhutis, things like that. They're empowered by Krishna to function in this world. So in describing the Tadakatmarupa, one of the forms that he describes is what is called the Purusha avatars. He talks about the Purusha avatars, Guna avatars, Lila avatars, Manvantara avatars, all these different types of avatars. But with the Purusha avatars, they're the avatars that manifest to expand the creation. So there's 2 levels of creation. If we look at this chapter, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he entitles this chapter the 10 topics of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Prabhupada's entitled this chapter, the Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And they're actually quite compatible titles, because by demonstrating how there's 10 topics in a Mahapurana, and the Bhagavatam, as we understand, is the Amala Purana, or the spotless Purana, above all other Puranas. By describing these 10 topics in the Bhagavatam, we can see how everything in the creation, everything in existence, is described in the Bhagavatam. So we can see, therefore, that the Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. So if we just flick back to the first verse, I just want to just briefly touch on the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam. It says, Atrasaga Vishagascha Stanam Poshanam Buttaya Manvataresha Anukankata Nirodha Mukti Ashraya. So this is the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, or 10 divisions of statements. So it starts off by Saga, means creation. This is the primary creation. So this essentially means the creation that took place before the modes of nature, before the jivas were involved. And we see what happens is that, Krishna, he expands himself. And he expands himself in many different ways, but one of the ways he expands himself is as Lord Balaram. And from Lord Balaram comes Shankarshan, from Shankarshan comes Mahashankarshan, then another Shankarshan. And from this second Sankarshan, or Shankarshan, Mahashankarshan, then Shankarshan again, comes the Purushavatars, which means Karanadakshayi Vishnu, Garbhadakshayi Vishnu, and Chiradakshayi Vishnu. So Karana means is Savakarana Karanam, as it mentions in the first verse of the 5th chapter of the Gita. This Karana means cause. So we see how this Karana Dakashayi, Shayi means to lie down. So and Daka is the water. So he lies down on the water of the Karana, or the causal ocean. And when he lies down actually on Anantashesh, this divine serpent that manifests from Lord Balaram, Anantashesh. Or Shesha Shayi, Shayi meaning again the lying down or the couch. So he lies down on this form of Anantashesh, and you can imagine the waters of the causal ocean. It's not like it's a placid lake. It's quite it's moving around a lot, and so we see how with Anantashesh, he's lying on, he's formed himself as a couch, wrapped up all his coils. Like sometimes you see up here in the Kadamba tree, these big carpet snakes, and they wrap themselves around in such a way, it's just like this big blob of snake up in the tree. And so Anantashesh is like that, and then Karanadakshayi Vishnu is lying on that form, and he's making it a very comfortable arrangement for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and also he's sheltering him with his hoods. And so then he lies down on this form of Anantashesh, and then he enters into mystic slumber. And it's quite mystic, because like when we go to sleep, basically what we do is we're absorbed in the mode of ignorance. But when the Lord goes to sleep, and also when we go to sleep, all these toxins is what they call mala come out of our body. It's sleep from the eyes, wax from the ears, and gunk comes out of your skin and stuff like that. But when the Lord lies down in the ocean, there's all these little golden seeds manifest in the pores of his skin, and they start to, as he breathes out, they flow out like bubbles, just coming out of all the pores. And you can imagine how many pores we have in our body. There's billions upon billions of pores in our body. So just like that, the same with Karanadakshayi Vishnu, these countless seeds, it's described as these golden seeds or golden sperms, eggs, are coming out of his body. And they coagulate together in little threads, and they rest down upon the ocean. And then as they rest down on the ocean, as they're going down towards the ocean, they start to gather the elements, the 5 elements, the tanmatras that was talked about earlier on in this canto, and then he expands in as many universes. He expands into another form called Garbhadakshayi Vishnu. So Garbha means the womb. So the universes are like wombs where all the jivas enter in. So he enters in there as Garbhadakshayi Vishnu. He sweats because it's hot in there, and he half fills that universe with sweat. But it's not smelly sweat like our sweat. It's very, very beautiful and fragrant. And it describes how he half fills the universe. And just consider this, like the universe we're in is how many billion miles across? 4 billion miles across. So you can imagine how many cubic miles of sweat that is to half fill that. It's a lot of water. And this is the smallest universe, or one of the smallest universes. There's many that are much, much bigger than our universe. And even though he does that, he sweats and he fills up this universe, it's not like he's depleted. You can imagine, you go to a gym or do this hot yoga or something like this, and you're sweating so much, and you feel kind of like, whew, a bit drained afterwards. But he doesn't feel drained, even though he's sweated out so much. And then he lies down, and from his navel grows Brahma. And so up to the point of Brahma coming from his navel and the jivas entering into that universe and the elements going from the point of Pradhan to Mahatattva, up to that point, this is called Saga, because this is the creation of Krishna. This is the primary creation, the first creation. And then as soon as the jivas and the modes of nature enter into that, so when the Pradhan goes from the Mahatattva, that's the modes of nature starting to interact. The Pradhan means the non-conglomerate. They're not manifest, it's just energy. As soon as it goes from Pradhan to Mahatattva, this is my understanding, is that this is the Vishaga, or the secondary creation, when Brahma starts to enter into the scene and manifest the universe. So we see how there's these different elements of creation that are being described there in this Bhagavatam. And as I was saying before, many people are absorbed in that and thinking how wonderful, and indeed it is very, very wonderful, the way Krishna creates this whole universe. And he himself, as it is described in the next verse, he himself is not directly involved in this. Even though we see it mentions how in the Puranas and different aspects of the Vedas, there are descriptions saying, describing how Krishna is involved. It points out that these are simply there to give the understanding how Krishna is ultimately the creator, not that he's actually doing anything, because as we see, the description is given is how he simply glances, and even his glance itself doesn't touch the material nature. It's carried by Shambhu, this form of Lord Shiva, who then impregnates Ramadevi, who is the material nature. So just even he personally doesn't directly contact the material nature, but just by his desire and by his glance, the whole thing begins, stirs into motion. So if we look at, and there's a lot of information here in the Bhagavatam, particularly in the second chapter, the first canto, the second canto, the third canto, the fourth canto, particularly the fifth canto, a lot of information about creation. And if we reflect on this and we see how wonderfully this creation is taking place simply by the Lord's desire, and it's quite extraordinary. And so we see here, though, that this verse is talking about how that the great transcendentalists, they describe these activities and they marvel at it. But for someone who's a pure devotee of the Lord, they see more glorious things than simply this creation. They look at this and they're seeing actually the wonderful pastimes of Krishna and how Krishna interacts with his devotees. And as I was mentioning, the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam, it talks about the creation, sub-creation, the planetary systems, the whole structure. A lot of this is talked about in the fifth canto, how you have all the 14 planetary systems and how, starting off with the subterranean planets, then going up to the middle planetary systems and the higher planetary systems, and then above that we have the spiritual planets. Then protection by the Lord. This is also a very important topic discussed in the Bhagavatam. And we see the protection by the Lord. This is discussed all throughout the Bhagavatam, or the Lord manifesting his mercy. For instance, we can see in the first canto, can anyone think of the example of protection by the Lord in the first canto? Draupadi. I didn't think of that example. There's two others I thought of. Pandavas and Parikshit. Because when Ashwatthama, when he cast his Brahmastra, there was 5 arrows. So some of those arrows were meant for the 5 Pandavas, and the other arrow was meant for Parikshit in the womb. So Krishna, through inspiring Arjuna, was able to nullify the arrows that were meant for the Pandavas, but he entered into the womb and protected Parikshit from the other Brahmastra. And we see in the third canto, there's many examples of this potion or protection. In the fourth canto with Dhruva Maharaj. In the fifth canto, the sixth canto, we see with Gajendra. So many examples of how Krishna's interacting with the devotees and protecting devotees. Then, of course, the creative impetus. This canto here is dealing with that. Also, the fifth canto, how Krishna, casts his glance, but also how the desire of the jivas to enjoy this material world is also an element of that creative impetus. Then, in the eighth canto, we see the manus. This is described a lot in the eighth canto, but also it's described, I think, in the beginning of the fifth canto. And also the fourth canto talks about all the daughters of Manu and their descendants. Then the science of God is discussed. Then Nirodha, going back home, back to Godhead. This is a very, very important discussion also. And the Bhagavatam, largely, you'll see throughout every single canto, it discusses the process of how we go back home, back to Godhead. And Jiva Goswami, he makes this point, how in his Sandarbha commentaries on this chapter, how these 10 topics of the Bhagavatam are woven throughout the entire Bhagavatam. And so we see the science of Godhead, or how to become God conscious, in every single canto. It's discussed. And ultimately, the Bhagavatam draws the conclusion through this hearing and chanting about the glories of Krishna. This is the path back to Godhead. Then, of course, mukti, liberation, is discussed, and ashraya, the summum bonum. And we see this point of ashraya, or the shelter of all, means Krishna, is discussed throughout the Bhagavatam. And ultimately, for the devotee, this is really their focus. For the pure unalloyed devotees, to attain the shelter of Krishna, this is their focus. This is their only interest. And we see, in the first canto, there's that wonderful description by Narad Muni, how after he, as a child, he had taken the remnants of the Bhagavatas and he engaged himself in meditation, yogic practice, and he actually saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then he spent the rest of his life in that body, trying to again achieve the shelter of Krishna. But Krishna explained to him, he said, you won't see me again in this life. But then when he took birth again as Narad Muni, then he constantly has the shelter or the darshan of Krishna. And we see how the devotees, the same with the Pandavas, that was chapter, I think, 6, 7, and 8, or 5, 6, 7, Narad Muni. Then the Pandavas in the last section, from chapter 8 onwards, or even earlier, with chapter 8's the prayers of Kunti. But we see how the Pandavas had the shelter of Krishna, and that was their, there's even that prayer from Kunti where she says Vipata Shantata Bhavado Darsham Apuna Bhavadasham, that let the calamities come again and again and again, because I don't mind the calamities, because when calamities come I think of you, and when I think of you I no longer, you're present. When I'm thinking of you, you're present, and therefore I no longer fear repeated birth and death. So for the devotees, especially for the pure devotees, the sweetness of the shelter of Krishna, there's nothing like it, because when they're absorbed in these thoughts of Krishna, then they understand that there's nothing that can harm them. Okay, the body may perish, we don't mind that. But if I'm absorbed in thoughts of Krishna, then I know I'm protected. And so for the devotee, to see the exchange between, to have exchanges with Krishna, but also to see the exchanges between Krishna and his devotees, this is the sweetest thing. And we see, the passing of Bhishmadev also described in the first canto. He's reflecting on how Krishna was serving as the charioteer for Arjuna. And he's just marveling at this. He's just thinking, this is such a sweet exchange between Krishna and his devotees. How Krishna, the creator, the controller of the supreme enjoyer, the supreme personality of Godhead, he is the most powerful living entity in the universe. Yet he takes the position of the servant of Arjuna. And Arjuna is saying, go here, do this, do that. And he's just doing it. We see also Kunti's prayers. She's marveling at how Krishna has appeared as this child, and how Mother Yasoda binds him up with a rope and ties him to a grinding mortar, because he's been breaking the butter pots and stealing the butter from the gopis' houses. And Kunti's just like bewildered by this. This beautiful, precious Maya Javadikachanam. She's saying, you're covered by this deluding curtain of Maya, and I can't understand this. I can't understand how you manifest yourself in this way and allow yourself to be completely controlled by your devotees. And this is the sweetness of the exchange. How even though he is the supreme personality of Godhead, how he is the controller, the supreme controller, the supreme enjoyer, everything comes from him. Everything comes from him. All the spiritual material worlds, they emanate from him. Yet he allows himself to be completely controlled by his devotees. And we see how the great souls, they marvel at this. And there's an interesting story. I don't remember who it was, but it may have been someone like Birbal was discussing with, I think it was Akbar. And Akbar was questioning, and he was saying, I don't understand how it is, you talk about how the Lord descends into this world to save his devotees. I don't understand how that's possible, how that functions. And just as then they were walking along, and his grandson had fallen into a pond. Akbar's grandson had fallen into a pond, and he couldn't swim. And so Akbar stepped into the pond and picked him out of the pond. And so then Birbal, he was explaining, just see how you are the emperor of the world. You are the most powerful person. And yet, to save your child, your grandchild, you come down, you step into the pond, and you pick him out. So he was using this example to show how the Lord also, and it's not like this, it's he's forced to do it, but out of love, because of his love for the grandchild, he steps into the pond to pick him up out of the water. So in the same way, out of Krishna's love for his devotees, Krishna could easily send, there's this nice verse in the 4th chapter where Krishna says, Prithanaya saranam vinischaya chadukshitam dhamma sangstapanataya sambhavam yuge yuge. And Prabhupada, he elaborates on this verse in many different ways, but in one way he regularly states, he says that Krishna doesn't need to come here to annihilate the miscreants, because we see, and we're seeing more and more now with how the modes of nature, or the material nature, is interacting or playing out to annihilate so many people. We have like fires, we have floods, we have tsunamis, earthquakes, pandemics. So many people are destroyed by these natural occurrences. And so we see the material nature very, very powerful. Whenever there's a fire, like in 2019 we had these massive fires down around Sydney, and it's like they've got their planes with their flame retardants and dropping water on it and stuff like that, but it didn't really have much effect. A little bit, but not much. They save a few houses here and there, but they can't put the fire out. It's not like you can stand out there with your garden hose and put out the fire. It's not going to work. So we see how powerful material nature is, or if there's a tsunami, tsunami just flattens everything in its path. Bushfire just burns everything. Floods, there's been a lot of floods happening lately. They just, like it wasn't that long ago, we had the worst floods Moorlambar's ever had, the worst floods Lismore's ever had. 2 meters higher than any other flood they've ever had before. And what can you do about it? You can just sit there and watch the water go past. You can't do anything about it. And this is just the material nature. The material nature is so powerful. And there's not much we can do about it. So material nature can easily annihilate any number of miscreants and demoniac persons. And also the material nature can, Prabhupada explains with the devotees don't need to be saved because they're already saved. And as I mentioned that prayer from Kunti before, she's saying, as long as I think of you, I'm safe, I'm okay. So Prabhupada makes the point, the main reason Krishna manifests here in this material world is simply to engage in these sweet loving exchanges with his devotees. Because he enjoys this. He gets a lot of satisfaction from the exchanges he has with his devotees. And not when he's taking, of course he does take the position sometimes of being the father or being the king or whatever like that. But that's not as sweet for him as the position where he becomes the dependent. Because when you are the one who has dependents, you're always worried about the dependents. Oh, are they, hurting themselves? Is this calamity happening? Is that calamity happening? Parents are always worried about their children. They're always worried, the child's got a cough or something. Oh, what's that? The child's got a runny nose, or got a fever. Especially with babies, because you can't communicate with them. So the parents are always worried about the baby. What's happening? What's this? What's that? But then so Krishna, he does take that position of being the parent sometimes. We see he had 16,100 wives in Dwarka, and each one of those wives had 10 children. So, he does take that position. But that's not as enjoyable for him as when he takes the position of being the dependent. He really likes that, And these prayers we sing during the Kartik month, the Damodarastaka, this is glorifying these childhood pastimes of Krishna and how Krishna derives so much satisfaction. But not only that, not only does Krishna derive satisfaction from these pastimes, we also see that the devotees derive so much satisfaction from these pastimes and so much satisfaction from the interaction with Krishna in this way, that these sweet, Satyavrata Muni describes how these sweet childhood pastimes of the Lord are drowning the inhabitants of Gokul in pools of ecstasy. They're just relishing these pastimes, to see Krishna, playing with the cows and the calves, and to see him playing with the monkeys and all these different things he does. They're very, very sweet. And the devotees become very enlivened. They derive tushanti charamanti cha. They derive great satisfaction and bliss by always hearing about these pastimes, conversing with each other about these pastimes. So this is I think one of the main points that's coming from this verse here is how the pure devotees they absorb themselves in things much more glorious than simply the creation and the destruction of this material world, but actually they derive their satisfaction and bliss from, and this is the point Krishna says, the thoughts of my pure devotees dwell in me, their lives are fully devoted to my service, and they derive great satisfaction and bliss by always enlightening one another and conversing about me. So to hear about these wonderful exchanges of Krishna with his devotees, this is where the pure devotees get their satisfaction. So I'll finish it there. Anyone have any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi.